But there's something about Van Gogh's legacy which is much more important than his fathering this or that ism of modern art. Vincent's passionate belief was that people wouldn't just see his pictures, but feel the rush of life in them.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most credible voice in true crime. Yesterday we dealt with the first part of the letter Vincent wrote to his brother, where he was talking about the portrait, the very famous portrait of Dr. Gachet. That was written on the 3rd of June, and in today's episode we're going to continue with that letter, the remainder of the letter written on the 3rd of June. I must also apologize. I probably need my eyes checked. On the Van Gogh Letters website, it doesn't incorrectly refer to just letters from Vincent. This was actually a letter from, it was correctly referred to as a letter from Theo to Vincent, so apologies about that. So in this episode we're going to deal with the remainder of that really interesting letter from Vincent to his brother on the 3rd of June. If you're new to this channel, if you're finding the coverage of Vincent van Gogh interesting, please subscribe to the channel, like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So we pick up with Van Gogh's letter around about a third of the way through, where he talks about the fact that he'll very probably also do the portrait of his daughter, who is 19 and with whom he says I can easily imagine Joe will quickly make friends. Now that daughter is Marguierite Gachet. She was 20 years old actually, and although on the 3rd of June Van Gogh was talking about painting a portrait, that would only eventually happen on the 28th of June. So on the 28th of June he writes a letter that refers to that portrait and that experience. I have a feeling, I could be wrong, but I have a feeling that Vincent kind of repeatedly asked and pleaded and kind of made a bit of a nuisance of himself to either Dr. Gachet or to Marguerite, saying, I want to paint your portrait, I want to paint your portrait. And she eventually relented after around about 3 or 4 weeks. And probably Marguerite Gachet kind of relented because Vincent was a friend of her father's, right? Now I can tell you, I've had to run some errands of late, and I've imposed on the son of a friend of mine quite a few times, and to look after my dog, just because he's very young to be left alone. And I think you sort of have the same situation where, because of my relationship with his father, he probably wouldn't want to say no. And so today I actually felt quite bad for him. I gave him 100 Rand, which is probably not quite $10, just to say thank you for what he was doing. But I'm just saying, there's sometimes an imposition that someone does because of, and someone consents to because of their relationship, to someone through someone else, and that may have been the case here. So he says, I'm looking forward to doing the portraits of all of you in the open air, yours, Joe's, and the little ones. And of course he's talking about the portraits of his brother and his family. And I don't think he did ultimately do a portrait of all of them. In fact, I've found it quite difficult. I could be wrong, but I found it difficult to find a black and white photograph of Theo, Joe, and baby Vincent. I'm just not sure if one actually exists. So it is a shame if Vincent didn't manage to do their portrait. He goes on to write, I still haven't found anything interesting in the way of a possible studio, and yet I'll have to take a room to put in the canvases which are surplus at your apartment and which are at Tanguy's, for they still need a great deal of retouching. But anyway, I live from day to day. The weather is so fine and my health is good. I go to bed at 9 o'clock, but I get up at 5 o'clock most of the time. So he's already giving us a good idea of this guy who is bursting with health, who is motivated, who is energetic, who goes to bed early and gets up early and is busy. And he's interested in his world and is enjoying summer. He says the weather is fine. He's talking about the 3rd of June. I was in Auvers-sur-Oise in sort of around about the 14th to the 20th of May, and the nights were slightly chilly, but the days were really beautiful. And it is very beautiful there in early summer and summer. So Van Gogh goes on to say, I have hopes that it won't be disagreeable to be together again after a long absence. So once again, he's talking about being with his family, being visited by his family, spending time with people close to him that he knows. And he says, I also hope that I'll continue to feel much surer of my brush than before I went to Arles. And Mr. Gachet says that he would consider it highly improbable that it should recur and that it's going completely well. So here he's saying that his doctor is saying, his doctor is giving him a clean bill of health, just saying, I think you're going to be fine. He goes on to say, but he too, this is Dr. Gachet, complains bitterly of the state of things everywhere in the villages where the least foreigner has come, that life there becomes so horribly expensive. He says that he's astonished that the people where I am lodge and feed me for that, and that I'm still fortunate compared to others who have come and whom he's known. So, yeah, it looks like the doctor is quite an emotional guy. He talks about him complaining bitterly and just what it's like being a foreigner in France at this time, and that things are horribly expensive for people seeking kind of lodging. He goes on to say, if you come and Joe and the little one, you can't do better than stay at this same inn. So Van Gogh's kind of going on to say, if you come here, it could be quite expensive. You should actually stay where I am. You guys, all three of you should stay where I am. Then he goes on to say, now nothing, absolutely nothing keeps us here but Gachet, but the latter will remain a friend, I'd assume. So he's also just continually emphasizing that him and Gachet are pals, and he's sort of trying to assure his brother that he's already formed a solid relationship with one of the locals. He goes on to say, I feel that at his place I can do not too bad a painting every time I go there, and he'll certainly continue to invite me to dinner each Sunday or Monday. So you already have a pattern developing here where he goes to Dr. Gachet quite a lot. It's not just a case of that he's Dr. Gachet's patient, but Dr. Gachet is going to become his student, where Dr. Gachet wants to learn about art, how to paint, and that is going to give Vincent a kind of unusual access to the Gachet home. And what he's going to do there, he's not just going to pop around and have a cup of tea and go home. He's going to hang around and paint, and he might be there when Dr. Gachet is not around there. And he also expects to be invited to dinner every Sunday or Monday. He goes on to say, but up to now, and I think that's quite important to mention as well, that he expects to be invited to dinner on Sundays. And we're going to look at, obviously, the day that Vincent van Gogh died. What day was that as well? We'll get to that in due course. He goes on to say, but up to now, however agreeable it is to do a painting there, it's a chore for me to dine and lunch there, for the excellent man goes to the trouble of making dinners in which there are 4 or 5 courses, which is abominable for him as it is for me, for he certainly doesn't have a strong stomach, which has held me back a little from saying something about it. It is that I see that for him it reminds him of the days of yore when people had family dinners, which anyway we too well know. But the modern idea of eating one, at most 2 courses, is, however, certainly progress and a healthy return to true antiquity. So Van Gogh's just sort of talking a little bit about having dinner at Gachet and just saying that, wow, this guy's going to a heck of a lot of trouble making 4 to 5 course meals, and he's saying it kind of, Dr. Gachet is almost bending over really backwards to go to this effort, and then he talks about the doctor not having a strong stomach. So it's almost as if the doctor himself can't eat his own food, the food that he's cooked himself. And Van Gogh says, he's careful about saying something to him, and so you can see there's a little bit of interesting subplots developing here, where the doctor's kind of going to an effort to satisfy his guest, and his guest is not actually that satisfied. His guest is kind of a simple person. His guest is someone who probably would prefer 1 course meal or something like that. Anyway, he goes on to say, anyway, Père Gachet is a lot, yes, a lot like you and I. I don't know what that means. I don't know whether he means that he is a nervous personality. I don't know whether it means that he is kind of seeking more out of life than what life is giving him at the time, or if he's just unsatisfied with life. Or it could even be that Gachet has an interest in the opposite sex, maybe an unhealthy interest in the opposite sex, or in alcohol, I don't know. I'm not quite sure what he's getting at there. It might be that he's interested in art, but he makes some strange comments like this that are hard to read in a way. What does he mean, a lot like you and I? Maybe he means that he goes to a lot of effort for somebody else. I mean, think about what Van Gogh did when he had a guest, when Paul Gauguin was coming to stay. He went to a lot of effort to welcome Gauguin. He painted the place yellow. He painted all the sunflowers to make it a nice setting for his housemate. He goes on to say, I was pleased to read in your letter that Mr. Peyron asked for news of me when he wrote to you. I'm going to write to him this very evening that things are going well, for he was very kind to me, and I'll certainly not forget him. Dumoulin, and the one who has Japanese paintings at the Champ de Mars, has come back here, and I very much hope to meet him. What did Gauguin say about the last portrait of the Arlésienne that's done after his drawing? You'll end up seeing, I would think, that it's one of the least bad things I've done. Gachet has a Goulamie, naked woman on a bed, which I consider very beautiful. He also has a very old Goulamine portrait by him, very different from ours, dark but interesting. Now, you may recall that a moment ago I said, did Van Gogh mean that how Gachet is like Vincent and his brother, is it his fondness for women? And by that I kind of mean, did they like going to brothels? Did he like going to brothels? Now bear in mind that Dr. Gachet is an ex-military dude, and the French disease was something that the French troops picked up by sort of going off to war and then heading into brothels, as part of that mustering, I guess, part of that heading out into the, into the country, into the outside world. And so one wonders whether this picture by Goulamie, nude woman on a bed, has got something to do, whether there's some relevance or reference to the kind of man Gachet is. Whether or not that's true, just think about a situation where Van Gogh is visiting Dr. Gachet, and he has this picture staring at him off the wall of a bare-breasted woman lying on a bed. And isn't that going to perhaps prick in Vincent's mind kind of a sense of, how can I put it, sexuality, a sense of, I'm a man and I would like some action, right? I'm just saying, just seeing that picture, isn't that going to awaken or remind him of sort of instincts and sensations and feelings that have been there that maybe he's forgotten about or that he hasn't acknowledged, and now these are staring at him whenever he goes to visit Dr. Gachet. And of course, within this scenario, you have a 20-year-old young woman sort of hanging around at home while Vincent van Gogh is there. And so to return to his letter, Van Gogh says, but his house, you will see, is full like an antique dealer's of things that aren't always interesting. It's terrible even. And again, this just shows you how quickly Van Gogh has become familiar, not only with Van Gogh, not only to some extent with Marguerite. Obviously, he's not become that familiar with her, but she's floating around. But he's become quite familiar with the house itself. And he talks about it being sort of full of material things and old things. And again, Van Gogh is a little bit critical. Every now and then, like I say, he will describe him as he's like you and me, but then there's a little bit of a hint of criticism. And so, for example, he will say here, some of the stuff in this guy's house aren't that interesting. In fact, he says it's terrible. So it seems like he's sort of saying, here and there's a nice artwork from the doctor, but this guy doesn't really have very good taste. This guy lacks the sort of creative impulse where he innately has good artistic taste or something like that. Not necessarily taste, but a knack for art, if that's the word. He goes on to say, but in all of this, there's this good aspect that there would always be what I need there for arranging flowers or still lifes. I've done studies for him to show him that should he not be paid in money, we'll nevertheless still compensate him for what he does for us. So he's talking now already about the fact that Gachet and him have kind of made an arrangement that he's going to kind of either tutor him on how to paint still lifes, kind of in Gachet's home, or in the garden, using flowers and arranging flowers on that site, and then doing studies for him that's obviously still lives, and showing Dr. Gachet the techniques of capturing those sort of things. And obviously the garden, and so this is the aspect that Van Gogh likes. He says the garden provides this opportunity for arranging flowers, like taking flowers out of the garden, arranging them and painting them. And he says he quite likes that. So in a weird way, Van Gogh is kind of saying, you know what, there's one or two nice artworks in this house. The garden is awesome, but the rest of the stuff in this guy's house are junk, is terrible. That's kind of what he's saying. And think about how a house appears, what that tends to say about a person. And so what is this house full of antiques saying about Dr. Gachet? Isn't it saying that it's kind of a stuck, rigid, maybe even quite a conservative guy, a guy that's full of old things and old thoughts and old views, and maybe to some extent stuck in the past and inflexible in certain ways? Bear in mind, he's quite a religious dude as well. He goes on to say, do you know an etching by Bracamon, the portrait of Comte? It's a masterpiece. I'd also need, as soon as possible, 12 tubes zinc white from Tassay and 2 medium tubes geranium lake. Then as soon as you could send them, I'd be absolutely set upon copying all of Barguet's Etudes or Farsain. I really don't know how to pronounce that. The nude figures. I can draw them quite quickly. Let's say the 60 sheets that there are in a month, so you might send a copy on loan. I'd make sure not to stain or dirty it. If I neglected to keep on studying proportions and the nude, I'd find myself in a bad position later on. Don't think this absurd or futile. Now, again, I want to just pause on this, and I want to take you to just a certain mindset. You kind of have Vincent talking about people. He's talking about Dr. Gachet, he's talking about his daughter, he's talking about artworks, he's talking about the inside of the house, he's talking about how he's getting along with the doctor. At the same time, he's kind of thinking about drawing nude figures. And in this particular paragraph, I think he refers to it twice, as in terms of just the word nudes. And again, just bear in mind, this is where his mind is at this point. And bear in mind, there is this nude painting, or this semi-nude painting on Dr. Gachet's wall. And so you kind of get the feeling that Vincent's either triggered or activated by this idea of why don't we paint nudes? Why don't we do nudes, kind of thing. He goes on to say, Gachet also told me that if I wanted to give him great pleasure, he would like me to redo for him the copy of Delacroix's Pieta, which he gazed at for a long time. And that kind of has a semi-nude or a bare-chested Christ-like figure. You know, the bottom of his body is covered in loincloths, but again, there's this sort of very physical, almost sexual sense of bodies that Vincent van Gogh is writing about now to his brother. In just a general sense, we notice that he's ordering oils, he's very busy, he's very clear-minded. Is there any hint anywhere here that is unhappy, that is angry about something, that is upset about anything, that is wanting for something? Is there any sense that he is struggling with his health, or that is that there's anything that he's sort of kicking against? And what I'm referring to here specifically is madness. He was supposed to be the mad artist. In this particular letter, when he painted the portrait of Dr. Gachet, bear in mind he's now supposedly being treated by this doctor. Is there any hint of madness? The doctor doesn't say to him, wow, you are really sick, go home, don't think about art, don't think about women, don't think about anything, just go home and read the Bible, or go home and just, stay in bed because you're so erratic. It's none of that. He treats him as a completely normal, healthy person. And that may actually have been the problem, was that Van Gogh was kind of a normal, healthy, full-blooded male, a full-blooded person with normal feelings, normal desires, normal feelings of attraction. Okay, and so to wrap up this letter, Van Gogh writes, later he'll probably give me a hand with the models. I feel that he'll understand us completely, and that he'll work with you and me without reservation, with all his intelligence, for the love of art, for art's sake. And he'll perhaps have me do some portraits. Now, to have clients for portraits, one must be able to show different ones that one has done. That's the only possibility I can see of placing something. But however, certain canvases will one day find collectors. So he's talking about trying to sell his work. And so even in this area, which is a kind of a traditional, lifelong bugbear for Van Gogh, he is quite positive. He's kind of talking about the possibilities for selling his work. And with Dr. Gachet, he's kind of got the sense that, wow, through this doctor, through his networks, through his contacts, through his well-to-do connections, he might be able to paint the portraits of well-to-do people and make some money and make a living and get his start in art. And it's almost like they're going to go into a bit of a partnership here, where the doctor's going to help him in that sense, and he can also help the doctor learn the art of portraiture himself. And it's kind of a bit of a quid pro quo. But you can see Van Gogh's quite enthusiastic and got is seeing all sorts of possibilities, not only for himself but also for his brother. I just think you should bear in mind that this has come about through the this whole thing of models and also nudes, and so that is something that he sees himself doing. He's going to be painting probably some ordinary folk to begin with, and then from there progress to other people. But and that is why he says he'll probably give me a hand with the models, meaning Dr. Gachet is probably going to pay for or source or kind of help him set up models that he's going to paint. Bear in mind there's a slight difference between models that you paint, you pay them, and then also clients that you paint, they pay you. So there's a slight difference. So models that are painted is where the artist is kind of still in training, is still doing kind of an apprenticeship, and that is what Van Gogh is seeing himself doing with Dr. Gachet. Personally, I think Van Gogh has got talent in terms of certain things, contrast of color, and interprets the landscape at times. This is just my personal opinion. I think he's terrible at painting some of the human forms, like people standing around or whatever. It just looks very amateurish, very poorly executed. It's just my opinion. He had his moments painting portraits, painting faces. I don't think his portraits are particularly good. Some of them are okay, but I think his strength was certainly in his landscapes. So I think he would have conceded he felt he needed some practice painting people, painting models, painting portraits. So Vincent concludes his letter talking about canvases, finding collectors. He says, only I think that all the fuss created by the large prices paid lately for Malays and etc., he says, has further worsened the state of things as regards the chance one has of merely recouping one's painting expenses. He goes on to say it's enough to make one dizzy, talking about how difficult it is to make a living in terms of selling portraits and getting into that whole business. He goes on to say, so why are we thinking about it? It would stupefy us. Better still perhaps to seek a little friendship and live from day to day. I hope that the little one will continue to be well, and you too also, until we see each other again more soon. I shake your hand firmly, Vincent. He seems to be talking here about, maybe the easier way of making a living in this difficult business of art and selling portraits is through a friend, through a friend like Dr. Gachet, and he's going to make life easier for them. Okay, and that's it. I'm not going to take things further. That is the end of the letter. We will look at the next letter on the 5th of June, a letter to his sister Wilhelmine, and then also on the same day a letter from his brother Theo to Vincent. We're going to go through those on the 5th of June. Thank you for listening. Tomorrow I'll be putting up another episode on the Madeleine McCann case, and obviously the day after that we'll be back with Van Gogh. So look out for that. On Patreon, it is the Kessinger tapes every Wednesday, so that's today, and then the Watts tapes every Thursday, again tomorrow. Wherever you are in the world, take care of yourself, and I'll see you guys next time.